This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in the Gem City of Dayton, Ohio. As a proud sponsor of this episode and the Brickyard Network, we are happy to help you with all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs by providing the best customer service and world-class workshops. Visit CornellStudioSupply.com for 20% off the largest ceramic book selection of all time. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters by potters.
Hola, it's Rose. I wanted to give you a quick update on what the Ceramic Materials Workshop team has been working on in the workshop. If you haven't heard yet, we started translating our popular online courses into other languages, starting with Spanish. Over the next year, all our courses will be available in Spanish, but right now you can jump right in and start with the middle glazes or self-guided crystal ball. To find out more, head on over to ceramicmaterialsworkshop.com. Hasta luego! We hope to see you soon!
Hello, my name is Kathy King, and welcome to the For Flux Sake podcast. I'm coming to you from the Harvard Ceramics program in our fair city, Allston, Massachusetts. I'm here with Rose and Matt Katz of the world-famous Ceramic Materials Workshop, and they are ready to answer your burning questions about clay and glaze. Well, hello, Matt and Rose.
Hey, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi. I am so excited. You know what? I wanted to say I'm excited about where we're going today, but then I caught myself. I'm not always super excited about where we're going today, but
we're going to go on a journey.
We're going to go on a journey, and we're going for the sake of knowledge. Yes, we're going to Materials Corner.
Yes.
What creepy, horrifying, scary stuff do you have to tell us today, Matt and Rose?
What, that we're all doomed? I mean,
yeah. Well, we knew that.
No, actually,
isn't that always like that's the case of Material Corner? It's always doom and gloom. It's like the dank corner in your basement. You don't go because you know there's all the bugs over there. And you don't want to go over there, but that's where you keep the pickles, and that's the best place for it. So you have to go over there.
Wow.
Like
that was a lot of detail, Rose. Okay.
And now everybody knows what our basement looks like, and Rose's affinity
Not
for pickles.
Going into your basement anytime soon, as much as I love pickles. Get to it.
Rose broke me. No, this one's not bad, but we definitely have some weird news for a raw material. And this one, hey, crystalline potters, you listening? This one's for you. So Rose and I recently decided that it was time for some fresh chemical analysis on some of our baseline raw materials. And so we sent out, I think about 30, almost 30 raw materials.
Yep.
For new chemical analysis. And we haven't published them yet. We'll put them out eventually in our calculator. Because we were using a new company for the chemical analysis, and we had some issues with the company that made us a little sketchy on the results that we got. They were inefficient, shall we say.
Yes.
But we did finally get back the numbers, and yes, we're waiting for confirmation on this, but I think that this one happens to be true. And that is that Frit 3110 has changed. Now, many of you may be saying, like, 3110, I don't even know that material. I don't use that material. What do you mean 3110? But this is why it matters for the crystalline potters, because at least here in the US, oh man, the vast majority of crystalline glazes, like 90% or more crystalline glazes that are out there, are using Frit 3110. And 3110, it's different than other Frits. Most Frits we're using for like boron. They're really there to be a boron source, and that helps us bring temperatures down. But Frit 3110 is different. Frit 3110 is really the Frit version of a feldspar. It's really a sodium source. We're using it for that alkali metal flux. But Frit 3110 has always had a little bit of boron in it. It would have, I think it was like 3% via chemical analysis, and it would have like a 0.05 boron level via UMF. Why? And we got back to chemical analysis, and there is no boron in the UMF or in the chemical analysis of the Frit 3110, and we specifically looked for it. You have to ask for a specific test to do boron, and it came up with 0. Now, this may not sound like a big deal, but for the crystalline potters, this is a big deal because crystalline potters are very dependent on specific temperatures in their kilns and specific chemistries. And if your temperature is off by 10 degrees or 5 degrees even, it can make or break your crystalline glazes. Crystalline glazes, you will get too many or too few crystals if it goes a little hot or cold. And so your pots can all look like garbage, even though you fired it exactly right. And even if you do, like, we always talk about the S-type thermocouples. You could have an S-type thermocouple, but if something is off, it'll just ruin that crystalline glaze, which is why, crystalline potters are so high strung, shall we say. But this is a bit of a problem because boron, right? We talk about that every now and then. Boron is essentially the chemical version of temperature. And what I mean by that is if you've got a glaze that's at a higher temperature and you want to bring that temperature down, you add in boron. And basically, boron will change the melting temperature, the peak temperature of that glaze, and basically not change anything else, right? So that's why most cone 6 glazes are going to have a Frit that has boron in it. The 3110 had always had boron in it. Not much, but a little. And that was dictating the temperature that the crystalline pots would be fired to. Well, in this new chemical analysis, there is 0 boron, which, if is true, is completely and utterly going to throw off everyone's chemistry in your crystalline glazes. And that could be a big problem. Now, this is not exactly news, and I have a reason why I believe it. But before I say that, I should say we have not confirmed this. We want to send this to a second lab because we had some issues with the first lab we used. So we're currently trying to find a second lab to run a new analysis. But I actually believe that this is true for a couple of reasons. Many of you know that Faro, who makes Frit 3110 and many of the other Frits, all the 3000 series, they moved their production to Mexico a couple of years ago. And when they did, all of a sudden they started publishing their bags would say 3134-2 and 3110-2. And when that had happened, some of our CMW students had started to notice that the chemistry was weird, that things were not behaving exactly where they are. And shout out to TC. Some of you know TC Staten. He's Cone Infinity on social media, and he's one of our dedicated CMW people. And he had really started to say, for the cobalt crystalline glazes, TC is one of our students, and we invented these glazes called cobalt crystalline glazes about 5 years ago, and TC like ran with them and really figured them out. And he had said not too long ago, it's like, all my glazes are not working. And he really tied it back to he had started getting this 3110-2. And he got them back. He knows his chemistry. And, when a glaze doesn't work, you can get it back by readjusting the chemistry. But I think that he saw what was happening before we got the new chemistry. So crystalline potters, double check your 3110 sourcing. If you are getting 3110-2, you probably don't have any boron in there, and you are probably going to have to start firing to a higher peak temperature. So most likely glazes are now over-nucleating because of this change in chemistry. Now, again, it could have been a bad batch on our part, but it is something that has been seen before by people that we trust. And the chemical analysis for all the rest of the materials we ran came out about pretty much on point with what we would expect. And it was just this 3110 that was really radically different And it leaves some questions. Theoretically, Frit should be consistent, but are they? And guess what? The Frit companies don't have to tell us if they're making changes, and so we're at the victim of whatever they want to do, and this may be one of those circumstances.
So this is a check back later type of thing.
Yes, but also if you are a crystalline potter, check your chem, check your performance, because there definitely could be things going on, especially if you've been noticing that your glazes have been working a little weird, or you're getting too many crystals. You definitely want to double check that chemistry and try running it without the 3110, without the boron in 3110.
All right. Well, that really wasn't devastating. That's refreshing.
No.
All
Different.
right. Cool.
Not bad. Actually, I will say this actually could be a benefit. One of the things I complained about when we do a ton of work in crystalline glazes, and I never use Frit 3110. And one of the reasons is the boron. Like, I don't want it in my chemistry. It doesn't serve a purpose. So it actually is good if you know that this is happening. But if you didn't know it was happening, it could really mess you up.
Mm-hmm. Well, the crystalline glaze people are a special breed in any case. Yes. Yes, Ben.
Oh, Ben has got a comment.
I have a question. So the other thing about 3110 that is annoying, because I do use it in my low fire stuff, is that it's slightly soluble, which can create issues. Did they fix that? Because to me, that's the biggest problem they should fix.
Ben is right. You absolutely do oftentimes find 3110 in low fire glazes, because as I was saying, 3110 is sort of the Frit version of a feldspar, because it's got a ton of sodium in it, and that sodium you can use to help make glazes work at cone 04. And what I have to say to you, Ben, is no, you're still screwed. Sucks.
Damn.
No,
sorry,
so the
producer Ben.
Well, no, it's a good conversation about Frits to note, which is that theoretically we use Frits because they're not water soluble. We've talked about water solubility on the show before. But the reason why we use Frits is there are some material chemistries that we want to use, but those materials are water soluble. Like borax would be great to use. It's sodium and boron. It is crazy water soluble, so don't use it. So we use the Frits because they theoretically are not water soluble. Well, note that I just said theoretically, because those of you who have studied in our glaze chemistry classes will know solubility and strength of glass comes from the balance of our two types of fluxes, alkaline metals and alkaline earths. And Frit 3110 has, okay, nerds, ready? It has a 0.7 alkali metal to 0.3 alkaline earth ratio, which from a durability standpoint is not good. And so what it means is that, yes, this is a glass, but it can dissolve in water, and it certainly will. And that did not change with the new Frit. In fact, the flux ratio is exactly the same in the new version as the old version. It literally is just that the boron's gone and the silicon aluminum levels changed a tiny bit, but the boron is the same, and so is the fluxes.
I'll go cry in my basement now that's not been fixed.
Suddenly this episode has turned into the end of Blair Witch Project. Okay. Kathy,
all right, come on. Let's focus, people. Let's focus. We got questions to answer here. I got one job. I've got one job on this show. All right, y'all. So our first question comes from Steve Brown from somewhere. And Steve has a question about a period of time and firing.
Hey all, it's Steve Brown from Herefordshire, the UK. I've got a quick question about what Matt mentioned the other week or a couple of weeks ago, about the last 100 degrees Celsius is the most critical and the most important part of the firing, and nothing really much else happens outside of that. What I'm confused about is if I'm firing to say 1300, so you're saying that it's between 1200 and 1300, which is the most critical, most important part of the firing, and outside of that, nothing really else happens. But what if I'm firing to 1200? Then the time shifts from 1100 to 1200, which is the most critical part. So it seems still something is still happening between 1100 and 1200. So I'm a bit confused about this last 100 degrees Celsius and the fact that nothing else much happens outside of that. If you can go into more detail, that'd be great. I do reduction firing, and I do find sometimes with longer firings, especially with my Shino, there's definitely a sort of different look to it. It seems to be more golden, and it seems to have more things going on in the finished glaze firing. So maybe I'm just imagining it, but definitely longer firing seems to work better. So it seems that it does influence it a little bit. But if you can go into more detail, that'd be great. Thanks for the show. Really love it. Thank you.
Steve from the UK, mystery solved. He also sounded like he was in a wind tunnel of some sort, but it's a windy day in the UK. So what do you think?
Oh, I think Steve is tripping balls.
What? Yeah. People are particular about their Shinos. They're very particular.
I am not getting in a fight about Shinos. Shinos are chaos in motion as far as chemistry. So we know how they work, but they are literally an other when it comes to chemistry. They exist on a plane all of their own. So the Shino part, that's not really worth talking about. What is back to the original question, which is that last 100 degrees of firing. What you're missing in the logic jump that you're making, Steve, is the assumption that that is the final temperature and that things are melted. And that is what we're talking about during the last 100 degrees C of the firing. So if you are firing to cone 10 is not a temperature. Cone 10 is the completion of a chemical reaction. And if you have a recipe that is going to be complete by cone 10, that reaction is going to take place during the last 100 degrees C of the firing. Cone 6 glazes are a completely different chemical reaction. And their chemical reaction is designed to finish at cone 6. And so their chemical reaction takes place during the last 100 degrees C of the firing. That's what applies. Where I think you're making your logical gap is saying, oh, well, like the 1100 to 1200, you're saying, doesn't something happen there? Well, one, if it's a glaze, right, then you're assuming that the glaze is fully melting and that melting reaction is done. And it starts earlier because we changed the chemistry. We were just talking about boron. Boron is the thing, generally, that will get glazes melting earlier and completing sooner. That's what the last 100 degrees C of the firing does. And that's really what we're talking about. Now, the other gap is when we're talking about clay bodies, once again, is the last 100 degrees C what matters for clay bodies? Yes. Assuming at the end of that, the clay is vitrified. The big problem that we have is a lot of clays are not vitrified at their final temperature. And that's the big catch. So does the last 100 degrees matter? No, but if that cone 6 clay body is actually a cone 10 clay body that you're intentionally under firing, that's what it is. So, that whole thing about absorption rates that we obsess about, that's a lot of clays are just not fully vitrified. And so they haven't gone through their last 100 degrees of the firing. It's just, you're just shutting it off early and calling it done. So no, not everything is happening because it hasn't gone through its complete chemical reaction. But as far as the actual chemical reactions and their completion, it is during the last 100 degrees. And you can adjust that temperature by adjusting chemistry.
Cool.
Trying to be short.
Very concise. I like it. So that we are on a roll today. We are going to go on to our second question. Oh my goodness.
Ooh.
I know, we had our coffee this morning. Okay. And our next question comes from Sean Lemon from Franklin, Tennessee. And this is kind of an echo of that awesome interview that you had with Freddie of Frederickson Kilns.
Hey, for Flux Sake, this is Sean from Franklin, Tennessee, and I've got a question about thermocouples. By the way, fantastic episodes with Freddie. There was so much good info in there, and on top of that, it was a really fun listen. I even listened to it twice. So Freddie said that the majority of round kilns are 27 inches deep, and that 3 thermocouples is too many. because anything that's shallow, there's just too much overlap. So I assume he's saying that 2 would be more appropriate, since you guys just finished saying that 1 wasn't enough. So is there more context to that statement? Like, if you've got a 28-inch wide kiln, 3 would be appropriate, but if it's only 23 inches or less, it's too small and unnecessary. Anyway, I'm interested because I'm planning to buy a 28-inch wide kiln that's either 22 or 27 inches deep, and I want to upgrade to S-type thermocouples. The ones that I'm looking at, I'll have 3. Since the S-types are so expensive, can I swap out just the top and bottom thermocouples and then remove the middle one, or just leave the K-type in the middle and disconnect it? Anyway, thanks for such an incredibly good podcast. I learned so much every episode.
What a great question. I can't wait to hear the answer.
Well, I my question is more for you, Kathy. Do you guys have low wide kilns at Harvard Ceramics?
They're not low. I mean, we have cone arts and Scots, and like everything from the tiniest test up to a big barrel kiln. We don't have any ovals or anything like that. But the cone arts came to the new studio with us in 2013, and the former director had 3 thermocouples put in and a cone sitter just to make sure no one burnt the place down. So since then, our wonderful tech Casey has taken all those out. And I have a goal of, replacing with S types, but I can't afford it all at one time. So this is a great question.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Rose, do you remember Rose's history in the tile industry, that they would use these tunnel kilns, which are long and wide? Do you remember, were the thermocouples all in the same spot on the kiln, or did they spread them across the width?
They weren't in the width. They were directly down the center. They were down the center, and they on the roof. At Deltile, they were on the roof, but at Trikina, they were on the sides, and they were staggered in each section. So the tunnel kiln it's built in sections, shipped in sections. So there's a loading end, cooling, active firing, and then cooling again. I'm sorry, heat up, firing, and then cool down, and then unloading. And so each section was like 5 feet by 6 feet wide, and they'd have a thermocouple on one side, and then the next section would have a thermocouple on the opposite side, and it would stagger back and forth. So each section could be changed around temperature wise. But they all kind of worked in conjunction. And if one thermocouple went out, the whole thing went haywire, because they were all communicating together to make sure the ramp was right going up and going down. And that was a city kiln. That's an Italian design one. The ones at Daltile were different. Those are low squat ones, and they were on the ceiling just because the kilns, they were all stacked next to each other, and there just wasn't enough room to pull out rollers and things like that in between the kilns. So they put a lot of the working mechanisms on the ceiling, and those were just sit down into the kiln, and they were one every section. And you had to be careful because you could only load the sitter or the car so high. And if you took off a thermocouple, oh man, that was disaster. So,
and for the folks who don't know, what Rose is talking about is that in the tile industry, they use kilns that look like a modern pizza oven, like you see it like fast food pizza, which is just a conveyor belt and like a slot essentially. And there's literally a conveyor belt, and the tiles will roll through this very wide and very short kiln, and they'll go through that way. And so it's like but it was like the length of like a soccer field, like huge, but small and narrow. But again, trying to manage the temperature, and that was really the question I think that Sean is getting at. I would think is more about width than about.
He says height, or he says depth in one part and then width in another. So I was a little confused there. I mean, I would think 3 would be overkill. I mean, we had a hard time with ours that had 2, and they had a hard time communicating together, because they're not necessarily independent all the time. If they're multiple thermocouples in a kiln, they're all working in sequence and have to communicate with each other. So it's not like they're independent thermocouples. So it's like if you have a 3 thermocouple kiln and you take one out, it's not, those 2 that are left are always going to try to communicate with the third one. So it's a bigger like swap out, I think, than if you just shut one off and hope it works. It's not going to be that easy.
Yeah, because that's what the computer's doing in a modern kiln, is like it's reading temperature at height, and then it's adjusting the different zones. So it's sort of thermocouple per zone. So
right,
it
and it
sees
has
that
a
the
set
top
point.
is super
So
hot.
right, and it's going to see those set points and adjust that firing according to those set points. If those set points get too far out, if it has too much of a delta, then it's going to compensate for that. And if it can't communicate properly, it's not going to work properly.
So then do you just just go for, well, like what I did, which is take them out and just put the really expensive one in the middle layer and hope for the best?
You could do it that way. I mean, yeah, as thermocouples are so expensive. I cringe every time. We have to replace
Every time
one.
Matt breaks one.
Or, yeah. It's like,
just having one, that's, less things to hit with a shelf in a community studio.
Yeah, it is true. I guess my question is he talking about 27 deep or wide?
Yeah, because I think Freddie's position was you don't want them stacked too close height-wise, because then there's not enough temperature differential to control, because the heat is all sort of merging into each other. And so I think that becomes a little chaotic. And so sort of Freddie's position was just, and again, I could be quoting him incorrectly, so I apologize if that's the case, but that you need a number of thermocouples based on height, right, to cover a certain height, so that the top to bottom differential is different. And the higher the kiln goes, the more thermocouples you will need. The bigger problem, and why I was asking about Rose's kilns, is where I see a major concern. And I don't know enough about kiln design. I don't look at them enough. But I think, in my experience, that when you have a wide kiln, like Kathy was saying, an oval kiln, I think they tend to put all the thermocouples on top of each other in the same spot, and not saying
because the controllers.
Right, because the controller's right there. And that I would be concerned with inconsistency front to back, side to side, because you're only reading on one side, and not, as Rose was saying in her kiln, where they're putting them on the right and on the left, sort of back and forth. That would be a lot better, because it's not just about heat vertically, but it's heat at volume. That could be a problem as well. So that would be my concern with that. And then as to the last part, I think Rose already answered it, but no, I would not put 2 S types in a K type. Do not do that. You're just asking for chaos. You could go with 2 S types, just top and bottom. That would probably be okay, except I don't know. And again, we need a smarter person than I am. My major concern with that is, like I said, usually if a kiln comes with 3 zones, that means there is one element with a thermocouple attached. Then there's a second stack, and there is a second element with a thermocouple attached, and then a third one is the same thing, a single element with a thermocouple attached. And I would be afraid, if you did that the second element doesn't have a thermocouple associated with it, and so I don't know what it will do from the software computer functional standpoint. Would it completely freak out? I'm sure a smart person could program it so that it just fires in conjunction with the bottom one or whatever, but I think that would be a lot of chaos, and that is probably not good. So the real answer is, it depends on the height. You said 27. That sounds like a 2-element kiln. I think our small barrel kiln that we have around is 27 inches tall inside, and that's a 2-element kiln, and that does fine. Well, actually, interestingly enough, that's a 3-element kiln, because that's a kiln that has an element in the floor. So it does actually have a third element that's not controlled. So I guess there is software that probably would do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we would need somebody who designs.
Good luck, Sean.
We don't sound as certain as we normally do.
Well, it's, kilns are not our specialty.
I
know.
It's
we have enough to get us in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not experts in kilns. So
the catch is we know how the heat works.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how the kiln works.
Yeah.
Right.
Like the hardware.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll
make a note to, revisit that if we catch any additional information, and I'll talk to my tech and what Casey did on ours. And but people, we did get through 2 questions today. I am so proud of you. Yes! So proud. Oh,
She's lying, everybody. She wanted to get through 3.
Of course I do. I want to sit here all day. I don't want to go to work. So anyway, until we see each other again.
Bye, Kathy.
Au revoir, Kathy.
Well, folks, that's it for this week's episode of For Flux Sake. I'd like to thank the listeners who submitted questions this week. And if you want your question answered on the show, shoot us an email at ForFluxSakePodcast@gmail.com. So join us next time. And when in your studio, remember what Rose always says.
Always remember to test, test, test. This is a test of the emergency glaze system. Beep.